Hi, and welcome to My Words, Our Journey, the podcast. I'm Monty, your host and author. Today we'll conclude our journey, A Captain's Last Voyage. But first, let's remember that when we finished our last episode, the captain was surprised that Kit had asked him to spend the day together, especially after his remarks at the captain's dinner. Today we're going to begin with Chapter 22, Plot Twist. It was 20 minutes later. Seb stood out front of one of the many shops selling postcards, local candies, and the like. Kit had made him hold a couple of bags already, but he guessed there would be more to come. He had noticed the couple earlier. They seemed to be shadowing he and Kit. How did they fit into all this, he wondered. It was while his guardian was standing in the checkout line with her back to him that he noticed the male take a small envelope from his pocket, hold it up so Sib could see it. Then he placed it under a decorative rock that sat next to a shade tree. The tree sat just out of eyeshot of anyone standing in line within the store. The couple seemed to fade back and wait. Was he meant to retrieve the envelope while they watched? Kit was third in line, a line that seemed to have hit a snag. There was no movement. 3 long strides and he could have the envelope. What should he do? Clearly the couple were still waiting and watching. A final look inside the store, and then he went for it. He was back in his original spot within a second and a half, or less, his heart racing. Kit now second in line, admiring the trinkets she had found. He took a seat on the bench located just off to the left. It was directly in the sun, so it was empty. Kit could still watch him if she chose, but he crossed his legs, carefully opened the envelope, and read the short message twice. Then he checked out the 2 digital bracelets, Timothy and Tiffany Chambers. Now that's interesting, he thought to himself. Scanning the bracelets would be easy enough. Drew would most likely be welcoming the guests back on board. But how did this affect the remainder of the voyage? Why the secret from Kit? She had to be their partner, right? A plot twist he had not seen coming. Was there only 3 of them on the ship? He knew there had to be several on the land to get all the pics and videos they had gotten. But the number on the ship? No way for him to know. This new plot twist was interesting in a couple ways. He could keep the information to himself. How would that affect Kit's situation? Did he really care? If they were the power couple and were out of the picture, did that mean everyone aboard and at home were safe? All good questions. Kit's sundress bounced as she skipped towards him. With a quick glance, he determined the couple were gone. Let's get a drink. She grabbed his arm. He felt a sudden spark, a familiarity. They had been spending a lot of time together. She was lovely. It would have been natural, if not for the fact that she was part of a group of criminals that had threatened children and families for money. To both of their surprises, Captain Sib stopped, gently took her arm, turned her towards him, and gave her a kiss. A kiss one might describe as passionate without being over the top. They were in a crowded public street, after all. Kit looked up at him, smiled, and spoke. Now I really need that drink. Chapter 23, Walking Away. Money can make folks do, well, just about anything. To get it, take it, steal it. Some will work hard for it, but others prefer the path of least resistance. That's one reason Timothy had picked the amount he did. It was a large sum of money, but after some research, he had discovered that many companies, the big ones, have trillions of dollars in their pension funds. Trillions. So while $1.7 billion was a large sum of money, it was small in comparison. More importantly, it was enough that each player would get a large enough cut, even after expenses, which would include all their personal, but also bribes, the money put in various staff members' accounts, as well as family accounts. There would still be plenty to go around. In his mind, this lowered the risk, if there was one to begin with, that someone might backstab another member of the team. Tiffany had been absolute when it came to sharing the money as soon as it hit the account. She wouldn't want to wait, and if she was told to, then she'd feel a certain type of way, maybe that she wasn't trusted. Timothy had strongly been against it, but in the end, she won. So the funds had been distributed as soon as they hit the account. Everyone had verified receipt, as well as their commitment to see the project through. That's what made it hard for Timothy, walking away. They had packed up the computers and such, and had disposed of them. Other than the clothes they had on their back and the backpacks each carried, they had left everything behind. Timothy and Tiffany Chambers from Arizona would vanish into the wind. When Tiffany had made the suggestion, half in jest, it had hit Timothy wrong, and he had fired back. Then, after letting it stew for a while, he commented, "It really does make sense, doesn't it?" They had no plans to literally abandon ship until that point, but it did make sense. They had the money. They could not care any less what happened to the ship or its crew or their families at this point. Once decided, they had to keep the fact to themselves. Two, that didn't stand out or draw any attention to themselves was one thing, but Kit would most certainly want to depart as well. Why wouldn't she? But she had been highly visible at the captain's side most of the voyage. Her absence would be almost impossible to hide. She and the others had their money, but still, it'd leave a bad taste. They understood why. But why risk something that didn't need to be risked? As they began their trip to the airport in São Miguel, Tiffany was on her cell phone looking at flights. "I'd like to go to Vietnam. No extradition treaty. How long bay? Maybe spend a month." They could do whatever they wanted. Vietnam was as good a place to start as any. Chapter 24. Navigating the Relationship. The pair could be described as unexpected. The age difference was obvious, but more and more common every day. They were both good-looking, fit, tan with wonderful smiles. As they walked, there was small talk, a laugh here or there. It was easy to forget that one of them was probably a murderer, and the other, definitely an extortionist. Kit thought about that for a moment before she stopped, looked at Sib, and asked point blank, "Could this have been something?" Captain Sib rubbed his chin, thought for a moment, and spoke. "I'd like to think so." Kit spoke. "Can we pretend just for a little while? If I'm being honest, it's been a while since I've spent this much time with a real man." He took her hand, kissed it softly. They started to stroll again. He still had her hand firmly in his. Lost in their own thoughts, the couple were in no hurry to get anywhere. If they both were true to themselves, this was the closest either had come to. Had come to what? Sib thought. She and her minions have used me to extort a very large sum of money, leaving me to take the fall. As if she had read his mind, Kit said, "You know, I didn't know you when I signed on for this. So, it's not like I purposely did any of this to you, the man I'm holding hands with and pretending everything is okay." "So are you saying that makes everything right?" Sib asked. "I'm just saying it's complicated." He laughed and said, "Well, between your share of the pie and what was put in my account, if money does buy happiness, we could probably wing it." While Kit and the captain played nice, Timothy and Tiffany were looking at their phone. She had pulled up some beautiful spots to stay. In the end, they decided just to wait until they arrived. Tiffany had been trying to distract herself, but in the stillness of her mind, she went to that dark place. Could we get caught? The words came out of her mouth, more like a whisper, but Timothy had heard. "At this point, I don't see a road that leads to anything but us being wealthy and happy the rest of our lives." I feel bad about the lady. Timothy did too, but he wouldn't say. If she had just kept calm and stayed off the phone. "Guilt is a real thing," Tiffany said a little louder. Timothy knelt closer. "Do I need to be worried about you?" While the pair worked on whatever Tiffany was feeling, there were others trying to wrestle with new aspects of their relationships as well. Melvin and Camp had always been like brothers, equals, even when Camp got the big job, bigger house, cars, etc. When it came down to it, each had a great deal of respect for the other, and an admiration that set them up as equals. This current situation had done damage to that equality. Camp had fallen hard, and while only a few knew, the one that may matter the most knew. Camp respected Melvin, would do anything for him. But in the equal department, he always wanted to be a little more equal. The math worked for him, had for years. Now he'd fallen hard. To repay the pension fund would almost be a full-time job in itself. He'd need to juggle both his full-time jobs moving forward, which meant more time working and less time doing everything else. Melvin had suggested he sell some of his stocks, cars, etc., to help repay the missing money. That hadn't gone over well. He wasn't sure if he could handle the stress or the new dynamic. He found himself questioning everything. When his oldest and dearest friend spoke, Camp would find a way to make it about him and his downfall. Melvin was also dealing with a lot. His best friend was a criminal. It turned him into one as well. It jeopardized his career, and most importantly, threatened the safety of his family. But the lifestyle his wife and kids had become accustomed to required a large and generous salary that he currently received. Yeah, he could find another job, maybe even a close friend, but the golden handcuffs, they had him. They had him good. Chapter 25. We are good. They were each 2 Long Island iced teas in when Kit lit a cigarette, pulled herself closer to Seb's chair and said, "That promise you made during your speech." He studied her eyes, and instead of commenting on her statement, he made one of his own in the form of a question. "Are you really single, or is that part of the act too?" "Well," she repositioned herself in her chair, not moving away, just getting comfortable. "Guess we have some dirty laundry to clean up before we take this relationship to the next level." Another longer drag. "Then I'll go first. I've tried the marriage thing when I was younger. I've dated. Most men are intimidated by a female that considers herself their equal. It takes a special kind of man to be comfortable enough in his own skin to be with someone like me. I am single, yes. My job was to get your attention, get close to you, and walk you through what was to take place. But my job ends there. I want to talk about after that. I want to know if you'd be open to the idea of seeing where this might go from all this. No ship, no agendas. But I also have to worry if you say yes. It could be just because I'll be the first of your revenge victims." A lot to process is, I guess, what I'm saying. "2 more over here, please." A moment later, 2 fresh Long Island iced teas were set on the table. The silence wasn't unexpected or unpleasant. Kit sat in silence. The man she shared a table with was not one to speak without thought. She liked that. Finally, "We have a few problems," Sib stated. 1. We met under false pretenses, so what's real and what isn't? 2nd, if I was to tell you yes, you can trust me. Let's give this thing a shot. How can I prove my honesty? Would it not leave you wondering? Good points. But first, we're both adults. We know what we want, like, don't like. And second, I see you're a man of your word. You tell me we're good, then we're good. You take your time. I'm not going anywhere far. Use some of that newfound wealth and pay the tab, yes? Kit could feel him watching as she walked away. She was torn. There was a part of her that really wanted him to say yes, so she was validated that they really could have had something special. But there was an equal part, maybe even a greater part, that wanted him to say no. Before she could finish her thought, 2 strong arms wrapped around her waist. "We're good," he whispered in her ear. Kit turned in his arms, gave him a long kiss. Then, "Okay, here's what I'm thinking." Chapter 26. Voyage over. Drew watched as the ship left the island behind them. He had done as instructed. The 3 guests and the captain were manually put in the system as reboarded from the day's excursion. The guests would not be missed for the most part. The final leg of the trip, Everyone was in full party mode and not worried about other guests. The captain, however, was a little trickier. He would certainly be missed. Therefore, he told his team the captain was afraid he'd come down with a bug. Hopefully nothing, but to be safe, he'd be in his room the remainder of the voyage. Better safe than sorry, with COVID and all. Drew was now officially in charge. It would keep his mind occupied with his ship, staff, and guests. Worrying about the new twist in the drama was not going to help matters as far as he was concerned. As long as he could reach Southampton with the ship and all its passengers and his family safe, well, that would be a win for him. The rest was not his concern at the moment, to be frank. That was Drew. He had used the captain's log to log in the false records, and the rest, well, it'd sort itself out. A few days later, the ship was in port. Drew had notified the authorities. The captain was missing. He had rehearsed his story and felt he'd done an above-average job telling it to the two detectives. No one would be looking for the missing guests, but he would have to explain how the captain had overseen the search for Julie and how he had just assumed the captain had followed protocol and notified the authorities. Also, he would explain that the captain had said he was sick and in self-quarantine. Then when the ship was in port, he couldn't be found. Room empty. While Drew gave his off-Broadway acting debut, Timothy and Tiffany were staying in what most would call an upscale bungalow, with a beautiful view of a large waterfall. It felt like they were all alone, but could be within a short walk, in a quaint little town with everything one may need. Tiffany had been spending her time painting the inspirational surroundings, and Timothy had been, well, working on a rough draft, a novel he may or may not complete one day. The working title? A Captain's Last Voyage. Seb had been reluctant to walk away from the ship he loved, but Kit had been right. There was no way out for him if he didn't take the opportunity presented. If he stayed, there'd be questions he would have a hard time answering. So, he sat with his second cup of coffee, watching as Kit did laps in one of the resort's many pools. They decided on Sydney as their first destination. No rhyme or reason, just because. Surprisingly, he was happy. It was not the retirement he had planned, but one he could most certainly get accustomed to. As Kit wrapped herself in an oversized beach towel, they smiled at each other. A kiss on the cheek, she was off to take a shower. Moments later, with his eyes starting to get heavy from the buffet breakfast an hour earlier, Captain Sib let his mind wander. It was then that he felt the cold blade of the knife across his throat. One cut. That was all that was necessary. His blood pressure dropped in mere seconds. He was dead a short time later. As the pretty lady walked past the front desk, she informed the staff her husband would be napping. They would not require room service today. Tiffany received the text. Voyage over. And that concludes this journey. It may not be the ending that you were hoping for, but I hope you realize it's the ending the characters had planned all along. Thank you for listening. I'm thankful for all the support. Have a great day.